All right, folks, welcome back to another edition of the Add 10 Gallons Concrete podcast. It's been a minute. Paul and I were just talking. I think we hadn't done one of these since November. So a lot to catch up on in the world of actual real life, in the world of work, in the world of college football. And it's just been a whole lot going on, too much, in my opinion, sometimes. So, Paul, how's it been going the last couple months and over the holidays and such?
It depends on which one of those categories we have to dive into. If we're talking about college football, it's been the worst in like 20 years. We don't have to talk about. See, I think what happened is Bama lost 3 games in a single season, so we had to quit the podcast because I didn't want to deal with you for those months. Now
It's not me. It's not me you got to worry about. It's, Will Banks. Will Banks is
Yeah.
always the guy lurking in the weeds, ready to just capitalize on any of your misery that you got.
He ain't the only one. You know who texted me? Do you remember Kyle Very?
Yeah.
Haven't heard from him in 15 years. Guess who suddenly pops up when Bama loses 3 games? 15 years. And suddenly my phone's blowing up. And, look, when you lose to Vandy, you don't deserve to be in a playoff. So I never thought Bama should be in it. I think the playoff's ridiculous anyway. I've never once in my life looked at the final season rankings and thought, I think the number 10 team in the country should have a chance to play for the title. No, never. Not once. Not ever. So I think the whole thing's ridiculous. I haven't watched a single one of the games. I'm just waiting on the national championship to get here, and then I'll participate in that.
Yeah, kind of similar. And after I'll tell you what happened when Tennessee made the playoff and they went to Ohio State. The fans actually went to Ohio State. The football team did not. They did not show up at all. They decided to stay in Knoxville. So that was just utterly embarrassing as a Tennessee fan. And honestly, like after halftime, I almost just renounced college football. I was like just totally over it. I didn't care about anything. I almost swore off like ever watching even college football again because I was just like that. It was almost like, I don't know, the mood just struck me right. It was just the icing on the cake of the lack of, performance by the team. And I was just like, you know what, why am I letting this affect my life anymore? I got other stuff that I can focus on. But then I also turn around and I check the games every now and then anyway. But like you, I think I watched the last handful of minutes of the Penn State Notre Dame game. That was a good game. And then I did watch off and on the Ohio State Texas game, which was decent at times. But Ohio State was, I think they're far and away the best team that was in that playoff. We should have stayed at home. We should not have been in that playoff. And I, just being a jaded Tennessee fan all throughout the year, I'm like, we won 10 games, but our schedule, like if we were a better team, we probably would have gone undefeated.
Yeah, that's how it goes. I think that's everybody's sentiment about all of their teams.
Like the game at Arkansas, like if we were if we were any hint of a mid-grade team, we should have beat Arkansas. If we were just a touch better against Georgia, we should have beat Georgia because Georgia's been off and on all year. But we didn't. I thought we were just a mid-grade SEC team again. And so when we got blown out by Ohio State, I was like, yeah, that's it. This is just our destiny, and I'm done with college football.
You're like monologue there about like wanting to be done. Why am I letting this happen to me? And then you turn around and you're going to be right back there again. That has all the signs of abuse. You are an abuse victim here, and you should stop letting that program abuse you.
Battered Vol syndrome is real. It is real. It dips into work a lot. Because, when you work in the construction industry and you've seen all the things that we've seen and been the places that we've been, it doesn't pay to be an optimist. You'll just be sad and depressed for a lot.
Well, I think there's some truth to that, but you have to be an optimist or you wouldn't go in the first place, especially in the world we live in where you're introducing something that most people have never heard of. And actually, speaking of that, I think that's a good segue into, we actually want to talk about one of the things we've done in the last month and a half or 2 months since we last recorded. We went to a copper mine out in New Mexico. You want to tell the people about what we were doing at that copper mine?
Yeah, it was my first experience at such a mine and with such a testing procedure. Normally, I'm a concrete guy through and through. All of my active minerals experience has been with concrete or cementitious materials of some shape, form, or fashion. This was the first time that I think I tested Act-Gel in something that didn't have cement in it, now that I think about it. Because like I said, when I have been at a mine, it's been with cement paste backfill, or with shotcrete, or something different, or pool plaster, which still has cement in it, or anything else. Anything with concrete obviously has cement in it. So it was just it was a new venture for me, to say the least. And what we were doing, we were putting Actigel and copper concentrate. Now, I'm going to try and, just from the outside looking in, explain, what I saw and how I can describe this process. It's an open pit mine. They have the haul trucks. They take it to a facility. It gets ground down. And correct me if I'm wrong, at this first facility, they extract the majority, or everything that's not copper, out of this crude material. Is that right?
Yeah, it could be a multi-step process, but yeah, that's the next like batch of steps.
Right. So you have this copper concentrate ore, and they mix this with water. It goes to a thick. Does this go to a thick?
Yeah, they send it to a thickener after that, because the whole process of trying to liberate the copper is done in such a way that your solids concentration is super, super low, and they'll need to thicken that up and make it a higher concentration so they can transport it through a pipeline. But yeah,
Right.
Continue.
Right. And then from that thickening tank, it goes to, in our case, it was a couple, I guess they were like storage tanks that were going to feed into the pump, which would then get pumped 7 miles, I think. Is that what it was?
This one was a 7-mile pipeline. That's right. It pumps uphill the first mile, and then it gravity flows and has some like braking systems on it for the last 6 miles to go downhill.
Right. And so from the storage tank through the pipeline to what they call a dewatering plant, which is where it's exactly what it sounds like. They just extract the water, they dry the material out, and at the end of that process, they have what is called cake. Am I saying that?
Man, you're nailing this for somebody who says they've never done it before. He's nailing it.
They extract, they dry it out, and then they have this solid. I guess by that point it's cake powder. It's like a crumbly, almost like a hard packed, some kind of material. Is that right?
Yeah. Try to drive as much moisture out of it as possible. So out of that filter plant, it's probably leaving there 8%, 9%, 10% moisture.
Right.
So yeah, very crumbly. Kind of looks like something you'd see in a block mix.
Right.
Kind of looks like that.
And then that is that actually the material that they sell and they haul away to the like a place where, for any kind of manufacturing?
Yeah. So you take that to the smelter and the refinery after that, and eventually you'll get to the actual copper itself.
Okay.
But yeah, that concentrate is going to be mostly copper, like 50% of everything that's bound in there. And so, they're selling that stuff. I don't know what they're selling it for in New Mexico, but and just even that concentrate doesn't look anything like copper. It looks like dirt, and it's 8% moisture, and they're still selling it for $3,000 a ton of this dirt that's mostly filled with copper. But yeah, so there's a couple more steps after that do have costs associated with them to get to the actual copper. But that's beyond the scope of where Actigel is used. We were there putting Actigel into that concentrate post thickening, but in the storage tanks Joey mentioned, that's where we were at, and we're dosing Actigel in that storage tank. Storage tanks has paddles on them, so it's agitating it a little bit. So Actigel's able to get all down in there, and then they pump it through the pipeline. And the same thing like with concrete, where Actigel reduces pump pressures, makes it so much easier to pump troublesome materials. We're doing the exact same thing here, where they had troublesome ore, and we were helping them pump more ore through the pipeline.
Yeah, it was quite the trip. I had a really good time. I learned a whole lot. It seemed to work. I mean, we increased throughput over 10%. So that means that they were sending more copper down the line, within an hour. They measure, tons per hour, gallons per minute, pump pressures. They measure all of these things, throughout this pipeline. And Actigel was able to increase the ton, like basically the production. Essentially, they had more copper going through the pipeline in an hour than they did before. And so also, we increased, or I don't know, that we didn't really increase the solids percentage, but when we were testing this ore, I think historically had higher maybe solids percentages compared to some other veins of material that they'd get into. So we did all that. we had a higher solids percentage, but with basically the same pump pressures. So in concrete terms, we had a thicker mix with the same pump pressure.
Yeah.
So had some positives come out of that. Everything looked pretty good, and so we're going to try to present that to their leadership and see what we got to do next.
Yeah, man, what a great summary. Fantastic. And it's exactly right. Hopefully that was enough to warrant, even if they don't purchase the XL right out, at least should be enough that 1 day test can bounce into like a 1 month test. Because for these guys to have a troublesome ore and they get more production out of it, the production value could be worth hundreds of $1,000s a day. So to be able to get that through and be more efficient, and it's not just more efficient in like making money, it's more efficient for their whole system. Their whole system thrives on higher solids concentrate. Mm-hmm. The filtering plant, if the dewatering plant has to filter out less water, it's going to be more efficient and operate better. So if we can, I'd like to even bump those numbers up, and that's what I'd love to have a second test for, actually, is to see how high we can push that. We increased the solids by like 4 or 5% the first time around, so let's see if we can jump that up another 5%. It'd be pretty awesome. So yeah, we'll see. Hopefully the presentation with their leadership group happens really soon.
Yeah, and it was really fortunate that we got this opportunity, because it was kind of like a follow up to your tests that you ran in Indonesia a couple of years ago. Some internal management, passed some data along, passed their findings along, and the North American team caught wind of it, and we got this opportunity in New Mexico. If anybody else out there if you know anybody involved with the mining community, tell them to reach out to us or pass along their information. We'd love to talk to them and see what we can do for them.
Yeah, pipelines, does it tailings, backfill, or concentrate, like ore concentrate. Any of them, the actual can absolutely increase the efficiency of that operation.
Yep. So that was 1 week out of our life.
And that was literally like the best trial I've ever been, as far as like people working hard and communication being top notch. So we had a team member of ours who's not on the podcast. Her name's Jess. She did a great job out there. And then you've got the very next week was like Christmas. So we went from there into Christmas. Like, you and I literally haven't caught up like on Christmas. So how was your Christmas, man? I list you, like literally list you like my top 5 friends in my life, and I don't think I've talked to you like about Christmas. So how was Santa? How was he good to your kids and stuff?
Well, Santa first delivered the flu to our house a few days before Christmas. So I think both of my kids had the flu the weekend before Christmas. So we all got back home on Friday. That Saturday, Parker Boone, I think, started having flu symptoms. He popped positive for the flu. And then Jolene got it a couple days later. She popped positive for the flu. So they had the flu from Saturday. The kids had the flu from Saturday all the way through Christmas. So by the end of the day, Christmas Day, both kids were on the upward trend from the flu. And then my wife caught it. So Krista caught it. She had it for a few days for over the weekend. Miraculously, knock on wood, I did not catch it. I don't know how. I don't know why. The Lord just saw it fit in his eyes for me not to make it to death's door over all of this sickness. So I got very, very lucky. But Christmas was good. It was busy, with 2 toddlers. It's going to be busy. We had a bunch of family come in for Christmas Day. It was a lot of fun. Carried on through New Year's. It was pretty low key. When you're like me, you got 2 kids, and New Year's Eve is just another night anymore. I didn't care anything about even staying up to midnight. I was like, I'll see 2025 in the morning when my children wake me up like I always do. So I wasn't too worried about it. Had a small gathering on New Year's Day, and that's about it. It was relatively quiet other than sickness. What about you?
Well, we didn't get the sickness until after the holiday. Like, first week back for my daughter was like a 2-day week, like a Thursday and a Friday after the New Year. And she picked something up during those 2 days at school, brought it home, was just not well. I mean, it took like 7 days for her to like fully recover from that. And now it's trying to get me, like right this minute, it's trying to get me. I felt it coming on yesterday after I worked out. I was like, oh, I can feel it. I get like, there's like a heat in my throat that I can feel. And I know it's trying to get me. So I pounded like one of every medicine we have in the cabinet last night. And I'm telling it, it's not allowed. to have me. My throat's trying to hurt right now. No, you're not allowed to hurt. You're not allowed to be weak. You're not allowed to be tired. You have things to do. We're not doing this. And I mean, and then we have to go to Vegas next week for World of Concrete. We'll get into that in a minute, but I'm certainly not flying there, not feeling well. So we're gonna tell this no, not allowed to be sick, and we're just gonna keep marching forward. As far as like what we did, was actually a lot more busy than normal. Like our actual Christmas Day was spent at the in-laws, and then my cousin from Alabama flew in, and then she hung out with us for like 5 days, and so every day we went out doing something different. So she was here, which may not have necessarily been the case had she not been here. We're a lot more relaxed. We saw a meme one time, and we say this all the time now. It's like, instead of saying like, "Oh, I'm staying in this week," it's like, "No, I'm going to enjoy my mortgage." It's just so we would have had a lot of days of enjoying our mortgage, but instead we went out, which I think was good. Took Becca to see a couple movies. Saw Wicked. She's a big musicals fan, so Wicked, and then also saw Moana 2, which she really liked. And you said it was good. She loved it. She thought it was great. I didn't see it actually. She went with the cousin. So now she's telling me she wants me to take her back so I can see it because it was so good.
Yeah, we're big Moana fans around this house. All the Disney stuff. Oh yeah, I went to Disney the week before we went to this mine. I went to Disney with my family. So the week that we spent at the mine was basically a vacation after the Disney vacation. Because any of y'all that's been to Disney with your family these days, it's a cult. Those people are cultists, and I'm not afraid to say it. My wife is probably dipping her toes into that, and that's probably what our life is going to be now. But we still had fun. It was a good time, but it's just a lot different. Like I remember we went to Disney a lot back when I was a kid. My mom had a lot of family in Tampa, so we'd go to Tampa and visit them, once a year sometimes. And so we would go to Disney a lot. And 30 years ago, you just went to Disney. I mean, it was just not just another amusement park, but it was, I mean, you just rolled up, parked, got your ticket, went in. Yeah, you had to wait in line, every now and then for whatever ride. And then you went home at the end of the day. That was Disney. That was it. Now they have, they got all the resorts. There's a Skyliner. There's a monorail. They've got however many parks now. And you, if you stay on the resort, you get early admission to the parks, like 30 minutes to an hour before everybody else does. And I don't know, there's these little, like, they're like Apple Watches. They're like little magic bands or whatever. You can scan everything, and everything's like linked to your room and blah, 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 blah. The list just goes on and on. It's a whole nother world. Like Disney, it's its own little country inside of Florida. So that was crazy. And also on top of all this, and after the holidays and everything else, we started potty training my son. So that's been an adventure in and of itself. So never a dull moment at the Bell household. There's always something going on.
We started winter softball practices. I'm one of the coaches in that community that helps out and coaches the girls. And we went over to the fellowship house where they're doing these indoor softball practices now. And the first one was on Sunday. Well, one of the little girls from our team, her parents texted me and was like, "Hey, we're not going to be able to come or we can't take her. Could you come pick her up for us?" One of the reasons, like the dad was going to the Eagles game. Eagles are in the playoffs this week. And he was going out of the game. Mom was at work, said, "Can you grab her for us?" No problem. Swing by, pick the girl up. But the dad walked her out. And I was like, "Whoa, what are you doing here?" I thought you were you'd already be gone to the Eagles game. And he looked at me with a look of despair and sadness and said one of the funniest things. And he was like, "As a father of 4 children under 9, I don't get to leave early for anything."
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So that hit me, man. I didn't realize he had four tiny kids, and the oldest one's his daughter, and but the other 3 are all little boys.
Mm-hmm. He's probably got a lot of broke stuff in his house. If you've got more than one boy in the house, I'm just convinced that you have a lot of broke stuff. Because I've got one son, and it didn't take me long to figure out that boys are a lot harder to keep alive than girls. I mean, just one boy by himself is rough and tumble. I can't imagine having multiple male children in the house. It's got to be just pure insanity.
I assume all the furniture's from IKEA. I mean, you're not buying nice furniture.
Oh,
no.
Oh, Jolene, Jolene is, typical girl. I mean, she can be content and just like color for an hour. I mean, that's just how she is. She can color and draw and read or just whatever. She can just be content by herself for an hour. My son is just like a little Tasmanian devil, just going through the house. He has a short attention span. He likes to climb. He likes to get rough. He's just all boy. And so, yeah, and we're not on time either. You were talking about that other guy having 4 kids. It's not on time. We're not on time either. And it's funny, my buddy Jacob, Jacob, they had a baby girl back in October, and Krista and I met them for lunch on Sunday. It was just, the grandma was going to watch the kids. We were just going to have, a day out without children. And so Krista and I were actually early to our lunch appointment with Jacob and his wife, Catherine, and the baby, because we didn't have kids, so we could arrive on time somewhere. And Jacob and Catherine were like 15, 20 minutes late with their infant. And we were like, yep, it's starting now. So we just assume that everybody with kids, if they're bringing kids with them, they're just going to be late. So no issue.
Yeah, and the concrete life, our schedules are dictated oftentimes by the weather, and in young family life, it's dictated by nap time. So that's what it is.
It's insane. But yeah, speaking of concrete, we hinted at World of Concrete. We'll be there next week. We're not going to have a booth. We're just going to be walking around talking to folks. So we've got some meetings lined up, both virtually and at World of Concrete. We're going to know a lot of people there, but we've also actually got a meeting with someone in Europe one morning next week at the wee hour of what is our
like
meeting?
6 It starts at 6 a.m. Vegas. It's just ridiculous. My flight doesn't even get in until midnight Monday night. Hey, let's have a meeting at 6 a.m. on Tuesday. It's like, thanks, Joey. But I mean, hey, I should get a solid 4 hours of sleep. That's plenty. It's Vegas. Nobody keeps time anyway. So we'll jump into that, and then we'll go grab some breakfast and, start our day, go meet all of our folks. But should be good, man. I mean, I'm hoping we'll see a lot of the same people we see every year, and maybe some new faces too. And should be good. I don't know that I ever look forward to going to Vegas, to be honest with you.
No.
But I do like seeing our friends in the industry.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I tell my wife always asks me, she goes, are you looking forward to going to Las Vegas? Like, to Las Vegas? No. To World of Concrete? Yeah, it's awesome. But I tell everybody all the time, I said, I don't gamble. I don't really, you can basically say I don't drink anymore. I don't do drugs. I'm faithful to my wife. So I just don't have any desire to be in Las Vegas. Everything's so expensive. And yeah, I could care less about it being in Las Vegas.
It's one of those few places where I'm like, you should go once. Like, even if you don't partake of any of the vices that you might think of Sin City as having, you should go once. You should see it. The fact that anybody decided to build this in the first place is incredible. Last year when we were there, we did the Tesla tunnels underneath the city, which were actually pretty sick. And now they have expanded those. I saw somebody trying to hate on those Tesla tunnels the other day. Like, they were trying to say, like, oh, the Tesla tunnels can only move 4,000 people an hour, but the monorail line could do up to 10,000 an hour. And I was like, yeah, have you used the monorail line? Have you been in the wrong hotel and you had to walk a mile to get the monorail line? Have you had to do that? Have you been at the convention center and you need to get to the other side of the convention center? The monorail doesn't take you over there. You know what it does? The Tesla tunnel takes you to the other side. It saves you 30 minutes of walking, and you can get there in 5 seconds in the tunnel thing. So yeah, you can miss me with the criticism. That I don't care if you're an Elon fan or not. The Tesla tunnel is freaking awesome.
It's free too, right?
Well, it was last year. I don't know. They have to start charging at some point, unless the city's paying them or the convention hall's paying them. But yeah, we didn't pay anything. We didn't pay anything last year. We just, you hop in a Tesla and go. Yeah, it was sick.
So yeah, a lot going on, World of Concrete. And then, we're been busy in the mining industry. We're busy in concrete. We're back to being busy as ever. Paul, what you got concrete news wise for us this round?
Yeah, concrete news. I found this article. The article is at motor1.com. I have no idea why you might think, like, why does a car company not have anything to do with concrete? But they're actually talking about the Porsche Design Tower down in Miami. So it's like super massive tower that Porsche built, and they built it like as a place you could live, Porsche fanatics can come in and do all kind of like Porsche experiences and stuff. It's all like in one central location. And so now like a bunch of people have them. Aston Martin has their own tower, and some other people, I think Mercedes maybe has their own tower. But the Porsche tower down in the Miami area is sinking. And after the Surfside collapse a few years ago, like their buildings are and their integrity are the utmost concern in Southern Florida. So the question is, how much are they sinking? How do we know they're sinking? And I was like, wow. So this article kind of scared me a little bit, to be honest with you. It said it was sinking up to like 3 or 4 inches since it was built like 7 years ago. Like
Wow.
3 or 4 inches. That's great. Even if it's 120 feet tall or even higher, it could be 200 feet tall. Every inch matters. And most buildings don't necessarily sink evenly, so it would probably be sinking to one side, and that's not going to be good. So,
Wow.
So I dug in. I saw the story, and I was like, okay, well, says who? Who says it's sinking? And said, well, it was based on there's one building listed in a list of buildings from some folks that published a paper in a thing called Earth and Space Science, Volume 11, Issue number 12. So issue 12, meaning it was in December of 2024.
Mm-hmm.
Their article is called INSAR, which is a type of measurements I'll touch on in just a second. INSAR observations of construction-induced coastal subsidence on Miami's barrier islands. So the first word that popped out to me is something called subsidence. And I had to look that up because the context clues made clear what it was, but I'd never heard this word. Subsidence is literally like the act of like a building sinking into the ground. Like that's the whole word is basically for that. Which I thought was interesting. Never heard. I mean, if something were to subside, I was thinking like it would move out of the way. But subsidence is literally talking about buildings sinking into the earth. So it's got its own word. And these folks decided they were going to, after the Surfside collapse, they were like, I wonder if any other buildings, if we can measure, they're sinking into the ground. Now, Surfside they had like construction problems and that were integrity issues. So the subsidence wasn't what caused that building to collapse. It was other things. But they thought, hey, maybe these other buildings are like sinking a little bit. Let's see if we can create a novel way to measure it. And so they did. They utilized something called an interferometric synthetic aperture radar, which is what I was calling INSAR just a moment ago, to examine the subsidence along the coastal strip. And what they essentially did was they took 2 different satellites that were orbiting the Earth that both cross going different directions. So they almost make like an X pattern. They cross in different directions right over the same spot. And they took all those images, like 100 from one and 50 from another over like a 7-year span, and said, okay, we've got 150 images over about 7 years of this exact location. And you can see the buildings go up. And then they're trying to say, like, from those images, you can tell how tall the buildings are using this geospatial data. And you can tell over time by looking at newer, more recent pictures that according to their calculation, let's call it, that these buildings are sinking. Some of them as much as like 3 inches, and a bunch of them, like 70% of the buildings in some areas. So I was like, okay, so that's their conclusion. I didn't like that conclusion. It sounds like a lot. That's a lot of sinking.
When you started describing about how they measured the buildings and how much they were sinking, with satellites and everything else, I was thinking in the back of my head, I was like, that seems just like really complicated. Like you could almost do that with survey equipment, could you not? Go to the top of the building and measure and whatever.
Yes, you can't imagine how complicated it is. So the reason that they're wanting to do it from aerial photography, but it's not really photography, it's satellite imagery, which is not necessarily directly above it. It's like, it is above it, it's crossing over, but the camera's not purposely pointed straight to the ground. So it's actually at an angle, which also affects everything. The only problem with doing going up on top of the building and just shooting a laser straight down, just assuming you had a laser power full enough to make that measurement. The only problem with that is you have to make sure that the the ground hasn't risen at all. So like, what if like the spot you're pointing at, like sand is just built up around the edge of the building 3 inches, and now all of a sudden your measurements are going to be off. So those are things like your 0 point has to be confirmed in some way. I thought the same thing. Wouldn't that be the easiest thing? Just go up on the building, measure it. There are other software programs out there, by the way, that already exist that you can take satellite imagery and just say, all right, what's the height of this building or whatever, and you can map that over time. But these guys try to get super, super fancy with it, right? But as I'm reading it, I'm like, how much? One of the first questions I had was like, how much subsidence is expected? We're building in like really sandy soils, porous limestone. It's kind of the geology of the area. Building sinking a little bit, or settling, as I would probably say it. Building kind of settling in wouldn't surprise me a whole lot. The Florida building code is influenced by the international building code that says settling of about 1 inch is pretty much like fine, like no worries. Bigger structures, maybe a little bit more, and as long as it was setting evenly, like it really doesn't matter that much at all. But I mean, 3 inches, 4 inches is kind of a lot, And then I started reading through it, and I was like, okay, it's kind of neat. Like it almost sounded like if we were doing like a CSI type of television show, and they're like, we're trying to figure out why the building collapsed. So let's look at satellite imagery, and we can calculate based on the shadows that this is the height of look, you can tell it changed over time. So I started digging in last night. I said, all right, let me dig into this thing and figure out exactly how they're measuring this. Well, they're not just doing freaking Pythagorean theorem and looking at the shadows of the building. They've actually got like 20 flipping steps, 4 different ways they're having to measure this thing, wrapping and unwrapping, assigning pixelation, because the camera is not pointed directly down toward the earth. It's technically positioned at like so many degrees off because it's approaching from a certain angle, that all the data points, like all the dots on the map, are like 20 meters west of the actual building. So not even like zapping the building. There are correction factors on top of correction factors on top of correction factors that are then wrapped and unwrapped and corrected again to like tell me that like this 200-foot tall building's 3 inches lower than it was before. And I was like, man, I don't know. Like so it adjusts for atmospheric phase screens, it's just for elevation errors, it's just for radar incidence angles. And each one of those assumptions, amplifies the uncertainty, right? Especially when you're in an urban environment where there's a ton of things everywhere, a ton of buildings and stuff everywhere. They used both persistent scatterer and distributed scatterer techniques. And the whole point of that was to improve spatial resolution. So how far away things are from another, how high, and how tall or how short things are. But it just introduced more assumptions. And in order to stabilize all the data points, they had to add more correction factors and more correction factors. Multipath errors for like shadows and stuff were really like screwing stuff up. They tried to validate their study by comparing it against what they called TerraSAR X and SARPROS, two different softwares. But the software results didn't necessarily line up to their results. In fact, the software actually showed things were worse. I don't know if they think that they have tightened it up with all these correction factors, have tightened things up. One of the things that they assume is that 1 centimeter of line of sight displacement translates to 1.36 centimeters of vertical displacement based on radar geometry. So that's quite the assumption. And if they're wrong with that ratio, it throws everything off. So some things they tried to do, calibrate the data with ground truth measurements, similar to what you're saying, like just go up on top of the building and shoot a laser down. They tried to reduce the noise, like vegetation, tidal influence, nearby construction, which changes a lot of the shadows and stuff, which can affect some of these points. One of the things that like really struck me, like why were they taking these measurements not on the buildings a lot of times, but like 20 meters west of the building? So the INSAR satellites, they use oblique angles rather than looking directly overhead, like we mentioned earlier. And so as a result, the two different types of scatterer points that we talked about, a tall building might project that a long way away. And that has to do with the geometry of the radar beam, but it also has to do with like the shadows and a lot of times like where the reflective points of the building are. So the reflective points of the building might be a balcony somewhere, or it could be the tallest point of the building as well, or it could be an awning at the very bottom of the building. They're not even necessarily measuring the very tippy top of every single building. They're measuring whatever bright spot they can get. And then assuming based on what they're calling zero elevation assumptions, meaning that they're assuming where the closest 0 meter elevation location is so that they have that ground truth. Again, I didn't see anywhere in the paper where they went to the site. Now, maybe they did. They're at the University of Miami, was where this came from. So I'm assuming they just drove over there and said, okay.
Yeah, you think.
You would think. I didn't see it in there, but I'm hoping that's what they chose, or maybe there's a database somewhere that has it. They had to do height and elevation corrections, scatter corrections, and the data processing itself has like correction factors in that. So just the whole thing just like reminds me of, there was a big scandal, and not saying this paper is a scandal, let me be clear, but there was a scandal in like the academic world where people were doing what's called p hacking. So they were trying to take, well, that was loud. You're gonna have to cut that out.
Hang on. There we go.
So the whole thing reminds me of p hacking. So not saying that this specifically is anything untoward, but it does remind me of all these literature, scientific papers that were written and the results would be tweaked and correction factors would be assigned to things so that they could increase their confidence interval. And so if you didn't like the result you got, you just changed the correction factor and bam, look at that. We have 98% certainty that this calculation is true, and therefore these are, this is the analysis of it. And this reminds me of that, because they're taking so many different methods and trying to combine them all. And when it doesn't work, they're like, oh, we'll just apply 7 different correction factors because nothing is just absolute. And then now you're going to tell me, you're going to write this fear article that the Porsche Design Center is sinking into the earth. I don't know, man. I feel about all that. But I think Belkowitz is going to be happy. John Belkowitz is going to be happy, Dr. Belkowitz, that we did read our one white paper for the month here.
And from that white paper, we concluded that a bunch of nerds just took too many steps to measure the top of a building. When I was saying like survey equipment, I wasn't meaning like, get to the top of the building and shoot a laser down the side of it. I was thinking more of like how they check grade. Like, you have your grade stakes and the guys have their lasers pointed or placed, various parts of a job site. And guy with grade stake can come around and say, this concrete slab is, 2 millimeters too low in this spot. And that's kind of what I was getting at. Like they can have a guy, or they can have, someone with a survey stake up there at the top of a building. They have their lasers set either on adjoining buildings or however they can set it up. And they can just measure different points on top of that building and see if it's even tilting. I mean, you could see if, one side is higher than the other, or however. That's kind of what I was getting at.
So the only reason you couldn't do that in this study specifically is there's no historical data to compare. You can't go back to like, what's my control?
No.
So there's no control point. So they're posthumously trying to say, all right, I need to go back. I need historical data. And the only thing they can do is get satellite imagery because that's all been stored in a database somewhere.
I got you. So you would have to start, with, if you wanted the survey thing, okay, start in 2016. I measure on this date, 2016, come back and measure like a couple times a year, every year, whatever.
This is the grand opening of whatever building, and I'm going to come back every other month for the next 10 years and measure this and see how much it's subsided, or how much subsidence we can measure. I don't think subsided is like the right word there. I think subsidence is like its own thing, which is crazy. I learned a new word. I love learning a new word. You know where else I learned some new words? Sorry to divert this for just a second. Every night at bed, we've been reading Nancy Drew. My wife bought like a bunch of Nancy Drew books for my daughter, so we could. She's pretty smart, but like loves to read easy books for no reason. Like she can read great. We gotta get some harder books in here. So we got Nancy Drew, and I'm learning new words from this Nancy Drew book. Man, there's some big words in there. I don't know what we were doing as kids. I never read those books. There's some big words in there. I'm learning new words freaking every night, dude.
Along with Nancy Drew, you got the thesaurus sitting there handy.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough context clues you can figure it out, but there's been
Yeah.
a couple where I'm like, I've never even seen that word ever. Yeah, it's crazy.
So would it be? I mean, Nancy Drew, if I remember, is like mystery. She's a detective of some, like a kid detective of some kind. So, like, are these new words they related to detect police work, or are they like CSI
No,
kind of stuff, or what are we talking about?
not normally. No, she is an 18-year-old detective, by the way, and
Hey,
her dad's a lawyer.
yeah,
They are well off and live in a nice area, and I guess she's just got enough free time as an 18-year-old to run around solving crimes. We're only in the first book. It's they're pretty long, and we try to do at least a chapter a night, sometimes two chapters. But yeah, it's interesting. I couldn't believe how many words, but yeah, they usually the big words come when the author, like the narrator, is just describing people's emotions or describing how
mm,
they're walking or how they're talking or just these weird adjectives and adverbs that I've never heard before.
right. Hmm.
Really interesting. I don't remember the last time. I like to think I have a pretty good vocabulary, so I can't remember the last time a kid was like, "Hey, can you tell me what this word means?" And I had to tell them I don't know. But I felt similar when I saw this subsidence word. I was like, that looks out of place. Like, what is it talking about? But
Yeah.
yeah, sinking of a building.
It sounds like a common word. It sounds like sustenance or subsided, or any of those variations. Subsistence, not
Subs,
subsistence.
no,
Subsistence.
subsidence, dense with a D.
Yeah.
Like subside,
Yeah.
subsidence. Yeah. Yeah. It's actually crazy. So I hope, as we like to do on this show, our goal is always to be smart, original, funny, and authentic. And sometimes we're not smart enough. We have to find new words. We have to learn new words too. I'm curious how many people listening just learned a new word also.
Did. And I'm wondering, what is there a verb version of subsistence?
I don't know. I didn't go into the etymology of the word. See,
Okay.
there you go. See, I told you I got a good vocab.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, bro. I'm telling you, I
Yeah.
watched the spelling bee as a kid, right? So
Yeah.
I did not go into the depths of the where did this word come from and what does it mean and what are its roots. But
Right.
I just accepted the definition that it was given. Maybe I shouldn't have. Maybe I shouldn't have. I went deep, not trusting this radar thing though. I was like, man, this sounds so weird. Like, why are we applying all these correction factors?
Smell a mouse.
So yeah. I smell something was too complicated. I had to think about it. Like, why would you make something so complicated? But the reason I think is, in the academic world, people are always trying to create something new, and
Mhm.
this could be version one of whatever it is they're trying to create. And maybe the next version can be simplified, and there's not so many correction factors, or there's proofs that come out of this, like mathematical proofs could come out of this that say, you know what, in geophysics, there's actually a way to calculate this, and it's Joey's law, and they create a new thing that this allows for the correction of satellite imagery over 2D satellite imagery in 3D space over a 2D image that corrects for shadows and whatever
Mhm.
else, man, and oblique angles. And there could be like something that comes from this. So I don't want to totally just poop on it here, but it did seem super complicated
Mhm.
and probably more complicated than necessary to then
Yeah.
write, which would be fine, except now articles are being written saying the tower's sinking. Oh my God.
Mhm.
And I want to make sure we all understand what's behind that article of the tower sinking.
Mhm. And hopefully it's just not somebody trying to get a bunch of grant money from the government. Who's the
If we're going to start talking about the government, we should just end the podcast. Actually, speaking of, we've actually got meetings and stuff for our day job here coming up in about 5 minutes. So why don't we wrap this up for the people, Joe?
Yeah, it was good catching up. We haven't done this in a while, for various reasons, and we listed the majority of them in our catch-up session. But we got a lot of things on the docket. We got World of Concrete. We got more guests coming up. So we'll try to keep this rolling pretty consistently from here on out. So y'all stay tuned. We got a lot more coming to you from the Add 10 Gallons Concrete podcast.